Welcome to NewYorkBIO's virtual breakfast series, a digital program started in 2020, bringing you fireside chats with leaders from across the healthcare spectrum. This week's episode features longtime biotech investor and co-founder of Aisling Capital, Dennis Purcell.
901. So good morning. My name is Jennifer Hawks Bland, and I'm the CEO at NewYorkBIO. And we are thrilled you're here to join us for another edition of our virtual breakfast series. Special thanks to our partners and NewYorkBIO members, PHCBI, who are sponsoring this month's series of breakfast discussions with leaders from the industry. As we were just talking before we hit go, we have an amazing guest today in Dennis Purcell. And we had actually toyed with the idea when we all thought we were going to be in person at JP Morgan this week of doing an on-the-road virtual breakfast series. Well, as fate and COVID would have it, we have punted that on-the-road NewYorkBIO virtual breakfast to 2023. And maybe, Derek, we should start with some slightly less distant time zone than the West Coast.
Yeah, I mean, if we just move JP Morgan to a more amenable place where people wouldn't have to get up super early or we wouldn't have to get up super early, I suppose everybody on the East Coast would be fine. Ideally, if it was a day, if we're going to do it at JP Morgan, I don't know if it would be an outside venue, but it's 16 degrees where I am now. There's some barriers to doing these shows live and on location and in the elements. So I think we have, thankfully, we have a year to plan for that. But again, Dennis,
you're required to be our guest on that live program, wherever it is.
Well, it's going to be a panel show.
I hear it's 60 and sunny today out in San Francisco, so we can do it outside.
Beautiful. It's beautiful all week. It's spectacular. There's no rain. There's no horrible weather like we had the last time we were there. It's going to be gorgeous all week. So the universe is not without a sense of humor sometimes. So
that's why that's why we picked January to do it.
Oh yeah.
So as you know, we often start with an origin story, and since we're already talking JP Morgan, this is a wonderful segue. So for the audience's edification, Dennis is the founder of Aisling Capital, was previously at H&Q, which is of course the firm that started now the eponymous JP Morgan conference. So Jennifer, Dennis, why don't you give us a little background, tell us how you came to where you are, and let's kick off the discussion.
Sure, thanks. Good to see you this morning, Jennifer and Derek. Yeah, back in, it used to be these small boutique firms were the ones that were taking all these odd companies public, the biotechs and the technology companies, of firms like Alex Brown and Montgomery Securities and Hambrick and Quist, which is a firm that I help manage. And we took companies like Genentech public and Apple and Microsoft and things like that. And this was before these industries became mainstream and all the big banks and everybody paid a lot of attention to them. But when they were starting out, there was just a few companies and a few dedicated investors, and we didn't have the technology that we had today. And so if you wanted to learn anything about your companies, you had to kind of wait till they filed their quarterly reports, and it was just hard to get any information. So the idea was to bring these companies together with the investors so that in one place you could actually see all the companies see all the investors. And the first one started with the 3/4 of a day and about 40 or 50 people there, and it's gone from there, I guess. And that worked out okay. And then as it grew, then it started to go kind of multi-day. And then more investors wanted to come, more companies wanted to come, and then it became a 2-day affair. And then all of a sudden, that's when the nighttime events started, because once it was more than a day, there wasn't anything to do at night. And so a lot of the law firms and the accounting firms and the like started having nighttime events. And then now, as many of you know, there's a huge number of nighttime events. And during that time, the other investment banks that started to get interested in the industry came and took out suites at all the hotels around the Union Square, and kind of they had their own clients that and trying to talk to the companies that were presenting there. The Westin then started to get full. We started to have more meetings, and it kind of grew and grew. And then we got acquired by JP Morgan, and the conference changed then to the name to the JP Morgan conference. And then it really kind of grew. I think people say there's between 40 and 50,000 people that go. And in the last few years, obviously, everybody knows prices have gone out of control with hotels and the like. And the conference itself has changed a bit. It changed a bit in the sense it started as trying to highlight the up and coming companies that the Goldman Sachs and Merrill Lynch's and the like were not paying attention to. JP Morgan has a different client base. So at the JP Morgan list of companies that are presenting at the conference, you see the big guys, the Pfizers,
right,
and Merck's and the companies like that. And so what happened then was that a bunch of other conferences started around the JP Morgan conference.
Yeah.
Things like the Biotech Showcase and the Digital Showcase and the China conference and a MedTech conference. And that meant it even got more crowded because more and more people came. And then the hotels and restaurants and bars jacked up their prices even more. And I think over the last couple of years, obviously the last couple of years being virtual, it didn't matter. But there was starting to be a backlash about this because it got too crowded. I remember back in the day, Derek, you were joking about doing it somewhere else. I can remember that people used to say, I hate it. And during the week, I hate it. It's too crowded. I hate it. And then I'd get emails the following week and saying, what a great conference. What a great conference.
Yeah, great week.
And they were always,
love it.
Great week.
It's like,
but now I
was gonna say, it's like labor, you forget.
Yeah, I think, right, exactly. But I think now there is some thought about, do you really have to go? I mean, we do have the technology now, and it used to be that Monday of the conference used to be reserved for a big announcement, a big acquisition, something that happened. It really got the year started. And, when you had a big announcement and you had people mingling together and you had good weather in January, it all was a recipe for really kind of kicking off the year in a good way. This year's a little bit different. We didn't have a big announcement. The stock market continues to, struggle. We're not there in person. So, we'll see what the year brings, but it's certainly different being virtual than it is being live.
It is different, and you don't get the sidewalk meetings, if you will, right? There's always the meetings in between the meetings and the meetings you didn't know you were going to get, and it's all the interstitial stuff that actually I think makes it or gives it kind of the extra flavor. The best way I've ever heard it described, my wife was talking to her mom the day before I was going to leave once on the phone, and she was trying to explain it, and she said, well, Derek's got to go to a conference in San Francisco. And then there was a pause, and she goes, yeah, he doesn't even go to the conference. He goes to San Francisco and does Derek-like things, right? Which is kind of the best way that I had heard it described. Well, it's interesting. I
always found it.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No,
I always found it interesting. I always found it interesting that after deals got announced and companies merged or things like that, when you ask how did it start, so many times they said it started at the JP Morgan conference or the HE2 conference, and just like you said, Eric, sometimes these impromptu meetings that one thing leads to another. So in that sense, I think it's really done the industry a really good service over the years. Now the industry's gotten so large now, but
I think there's a lot to it. If you think about it with the a lot of the larger companies kind of, shut it down in the end of December, and basically with this sitting where it sits in January, it opens the year with a bang. Like you said, people tend to break news in the first couple days of the conference, and it really just kind of supercharges the beginning of the year. And there's a lot to that. You get all of this momentum right out the gates, and you get people again that complain about it while they're there, and love it when they come back. So I don't know. It's a little bit ritualistic. It's a little bit just a piece of the calendar, but it's nice, and it's something our industry has that's kind of a little bit special. So I'm curious to see where it goes in the next few years. I genuinely am.
Yeah.
And I think there's an advantage. I mean, I know we've talked a lot, and frankly, we had to be, accepting of the digital, connections and meetings over the past, 22 months, right? But I think that there is an advantage to, but like Dennis, I'm walking down the street with you in San Francisco, and you introduce me to someone else that I didn't know. Like, I think there are advantages to having that in-person connection, and so I hope that our industry will strive to get back to some format of in-person throughout the course, of 2022 in various scenarios.
You could really feel that, Jennifer. I felt at the NewYorkBIO's annual meeting.
Yeah.
That was one of the first ones that was in person, and you could feel the energy in the room because people were really looking forward to being back in person.
Yeah.
And the whole vibe of the annual meeting was so positive, and I think a lot of it had to do with just being back together and seeing people you hadn't seen in a year and a half or 2 years.
Yeah.
So I agree with you.
It definitely, there's another element. It brings a little bit more to it, and I think we're in this weird, uncertain future where when and how do you hold these events, and what does it mean to be together? What are the good things that you can do digitally, and what are the things that really kind of need in person? So I don't know where we go next year, but I do know that we talk about this a lot, and it's one of the things that you try to weigh all the options, do the best things that you can, and and deliver. And the hardest part is that it's all uncertain, right? You kind of don't know what the next few weeks are going to bring. We probably got pretty lucky with where the annual meeting sat, that we actually had the opportunity to bring everybody together in person.
Yeah. But it's still back to the JP Morgan conference for a minute though. So like you talked about, right, the growth and how it had not only grown itself as a conference, but also all of the attendant, conferences and events and social events. And NewYorkBIO is, right in there, right? We co-host with a number of other state biotech groups a reception on the Sunday evening. Originally, as I understand it, that was as people were getting into town. Now people are arriving at all times.
Yeah.
Has it reached its max in terms of size and sort of adjacent events, or do you think there'll be a contraction, maybe in 2023 when they're back in person, or what's your prognostication on that?
It's hard to see how it can get much bigger. I mean, there's just no ability to get any, just practically, there's no ability to get a hotel room in San Francisco. So I don't see how it gets bigger. And I think that when we first come back, it's going to be a big deal because people will have missed it for the last couple of years. So I think, hopefully next year it's going to be in person, and that I think it's going to be a big thing. But people talk about, can we move it, or can JP Morgan move it to somewhere else, Las Vegas or something? But probably not going to happen. I mean, there's a long-term lease at the St. Francis, and everything's kind of happened there, and people are used to the rituals and things like that. But I think that in terms of getting it much bigger in the city, I don't know. I mean, there are some satellite conferences now being done in the Valley. Maybe it goes there a little bit, but
just the physical constraints, right?
Physically, yeah, and it's a shame what the hotels are doing with the prices. I mean, I guess it's free market, but boy, that never happened in the past, and now they're just really taking advantage of the situation. Which
this year I waited. Yeah, I mean, I waited. I bought my plane ticket back in, I don't know, November or whatever, or October. But then I waited on the hotels because they were non-refundable and so crazy expensive.
Yeah.
I was just like, we'll wait. So it turned out to be the right call to wait. Yeah.
Do you remember do you remember any kind of time at the conference where you kind of saw it as a turning, where there was a particular thing that you said, wow, this is bigger, like kind of a landmark thing where it got where you markedly said this is different, this is very different than it was, where it was a big kind of marker of the growth?
Yeah, there was a couple times. I mean, I think the genomics boom. Craig Venter had a company called Solera way back when, which competed against a company called Human Genome Sciences. And we were in the middle of the genomics boom, and Craig was making a presentation right before lunch, which really didn't say much at all. He said something about filing a patent on something, and it was kind of business as usual. And he did that, and then lunch, and then we had lunch, and his stock was up 41 points.
Wow.
And then in the afternoon, there was a company. There was a company that their big announcement was they filed an IND, and their stock was up 22 points. And so all of a sudden, you realize, geez, oh man, sometimes there's some euphoria here, and as the genomics bubble and some of the hype around the genomics bubble settled in, you could really start to see a difference. And you could really start to see a difference when the crowd started to come. You could see it really becoming more mainstream, which it is today. And CNBC covers it. I mean, all the big outlets cover it now, that they didn't used to before.
Yeah, I distinctly remember the turning point from when the Square went from just people sitting at some tables on their laptops to actually having the tents and everything like that. So the year before it was crowded, there was a single couch that was placed there by J&J Innovation, right? J&J basically brought a couch and 2 tables and had the J&J Innovation couch in the Square. And then I think the next year it had the Rare in the Square tent, and then it was filled from then on out. I remember that really, really vividly. I remember seeing the couch and I'm thinking, those guys are really smart. And then boom, and then everybody else was like, yes, that's an excellent idea, we're all going to copy that.
Yeah, there's a lot of fun stories over the year. The former prime minister of Yugoslavia, the old Yugoslavia, was the CEO of a company called ICN Pharmaceuticals, and he was came with bodyguards and stuff like that. But he was giving his talk, and he opened his suit jacket and flashed a gun that he was carrying. Like everybody saw it. Oh my God!
We're gonna listen intently.
There's plenty of kind of oddball stories, but anyway.
I would hate to have to be the person that wrote the initiating coverage note on that one.
Right.
He wanted us to pay attention, and we did.
Yes, and we did. Open with something that's going to make sure people pay attention to the rest of your talk.
Right.
So we've got a good question from Art Tinklenberg. He said, any thoughts on how many new biotech issues the public markets can absorb? Obviously, with the conference and everything else, the pace of IPOs in the last couple of years has been off the charts. How many do you think we can keep this up for another 5 years? Is this sustainable?
I don't think so. The world of our world, we've gotten here through a long period of time of ups and downs and good times and bad times and things like that. And we have a lot of things that would argue it might be sustainable, in the sense that a lot of funds have kind of re-upped and raised more money. We have family offices that have a lot of money. There's a great science on the sidelines and things like that. So there's on that side of the equation, there's a lot of reasons to think we could continue. You have big pharma that has to make a dent here in biotech in terms of bolt-on acquisitions or outright acquisitions, because they have a pipeline that is going off patent in the next couple of years, and they have to do something about it. So you have that side of the equation, which is really positive, real kind of surplus of capital, if you will, and that's around the world. On the other hand, we've had almost 500 new biotech companies in the public markets in the last 6 or 7 years. So, can we absorb all those? And if you start to think about the capital needs of all these companies, just those companies, and you think about what you need to kind of get to the finish line, it's an enormous amount of capital. I did, just for fun, the other day, I did a little thought experiment where I looked up all the companies in Kendall Square, biotech companies, just in Kendall Square. And then I said, if each company was working on 2 products, which I think is conservative, most people have a pipeline of more than 2 or 5 or 7, but let's just say 2. So I know the number of companies, I can count them. And I'll say that they can only work on 2 products, not 5 or 6. And then we'll say that they can develop their products at 1/3 the cost of what the industry says, 2/3 cheaper. Every one of them, every product is 2/3 cheaper than the industry. So I know the number of companies, they have 2 products, and they can do it 2/3 cheaper than the industry. If you multiply that all together, it's $1 trillion cash need. That's in a 3-block rate.
Just for that microcosm of companies.
2.5 blocks, 2.5 blocks. And so I think that, the other issue about the IPOs is that there's a lot of, things that happened. They all came together in the last couple of years. The crossover investing people came into play. The momentum people came into play, because up until recently you could buy, and these stocks went pretty well, particularly through 20, and the momentum has now shifted. So it's unclear whether they're going to continue to play. But because of that, so many of these companies are so highly priced that they're kind of priced to perfection, many of them, even with this downturn. And there's been a lot of promises of all these new companies, and they promised about what they were going to deliver in 22, 23, 24, and we'll see whether they deliver, because that's what they went public on. So they have to grow into these valuations. So they really have to hit on their promises, and we'll have to see where that shakes out. So there's a lot of questions on the other side of, even there's a lot of capital, there's a lot of questions on the other side here, because we really had for a while a perfect storm. I mean, we had new investors, that were family offices and high net worth people. We had funds that all raised a whole ton of capital, because the limited partners of the funds wanted to put more money into the industry. We had momentum players that just played the momentum, buy the IPO and it go up. We had crossover players. We had FOMO players. I don't want to miss the next Moderna. We had investors, and there was nowhere else to put your money. There were no bond. You didn't get any bonds. You didn't get any cash or anything like that. So we had kind of a nice little kind of convergence of a lot of things that happened that really helped drive this. But if you think now where we are as an industry, and just take the 450, 500 companies in the last 6 or 7 years, I mean, it's very hard to figure out where the winners are coming from. Like, can I pick the PD1 winner? I mean, I don't know. I mean, and I know something about this stuff. So how does a generalist person play this? And I talk to analysts, and I talk to my peers about this. And it's our job to know all these companies. It's our job. And you just can't keep up with it.
It's hard.
The really great IR firm, Trout, or the big one in this industry, they took a lot of their private companies and brought them to some hedge fund people and said, what do you think about these? And well-known hedge fund people, by and large, said, we hardly know any of them. And that's the job. There's too many of them. There's just too many of them. So I think it's going to become a real challenge to pick the winners because of the supply of it out there. So the next few years, who knows? But
So what is the,
This
Dennis, what is the solution for that for investors, right? Is it you only go with a certain companies that are backed by certain individuals? Or, I mean, like, how do you, as an investor, how do you figure out where to spend your time so you're going to have the most return for your time investment learning about the new companies?
yeah, there used to be some reasonably straightforward rules in the industry. So, what boxes did you tick off and how to spend your time? And they were something like, does the company have a corporate partner? Did Big Pharma partner with them? Because if Big Pharma partner with them, then I could say, hey, if it's good enough for Big Pharma, it's good enough for me.
They've been
right,
vetted.
the validating partnership.
Validating partnership. Then you would
There you
look
go.
at the venture capitalists. Were they good venture capitalists? Well, these venture capitalists are pretty well known and they did a lot of vetting and, et cetera. So if it's good enough for them, good enough for me. And then you might look at the board and say, these are experienced board people and they know what they're doing and they've been through it. And that's a validating. So there's some boxes you used to be able to tick off. Today, those boxes no longer exist. If you look at financings that were done, for example, and you look at who financed these companies, you just don't see the normal names like of NEA or Orgamed, Pappas or whatever. You just see very real new names that I don't know. So I think, Jennifer, that's what makes it hard. Some people would argue, you just do a basket of stuff. I mean, do you do a basket of cell therapy stuff? I mean, let's take cell therapy or gene therapy, for example. They had a tough year last year. The FDA stopped, the FDA, put holds on a lot of stuff, but it seemed to be easing up now. And most people still would stick with the prediction that starting in 25, there'll be 10 to 20 cell and gene therapy approvals a year. Are you smart enough to pick the right one? Maybe,
Right.
and you probably get well rewarded for it. But do you, or do you buy a basket of them?
Yeah. And spread the risk.
Something like that. Yeah, and spread the risk a little bit.
So you had made a couple of really good points in your vision talk for our annual conference, and this is not just a plug so that I can post the vision talk in the chat, but I just did. And one of the big things that you talked about was, really kind of how much money is going into cancer and rare diseases. And you then said, we have these other enormous and intractable problems that, genuinely need investment because we have a huge health problems, whether it's mental health, whether it's chronic diseases or something like longevity, right? So how well positioned do you think the industry is to actually, really kind of make a dent in something new? And I mean, as an investor yourself, right? If you have so many metrics that tell you why oncology is a good thing to invest in, how hard is it to go and basically diversify the fields that you're looking at?
Yeah. And I think that, and just one other point which Jennifer said, and I may have made it too broad. I mean, you may want to get a really specific, pick a specific area. I like the area of cell therapy, immuno-oncology, and you go there, or I like the area of anti-infectives in this area, and maybe you buy a basket of those. But the right thing is probably to almost go macro down to the micro. What do you think's coming now? So that gets you to what Derek has mentioned. I mean, we're spending, 2/3 of our healthcare dollars are going to like 5% of the people. And the chronic diseases that we have are just eating up the healthcare system. And as we get older, that's going to get worse and worse. And yet, as an industry, we're focusing on, narrower and narrower indications at times,
Right.
which and I think is great. There's an enormous need in the rare disease market for sure, and we've made unbelievable strides, and it's been so helpful to patients with those diseases. I do think we're going to have to pivot a little bit as we talk maybe a little bit about our responsibility to the broader society and start thinking about these chronic diseases, because that's where the real cost is going. And as I say, as we, once we get to 60 or 65, most people have one chronic disease, and everybody has one chronic disease generally, and most people have, 2, 3, 4 chronic diseases. And that's where the money's getting spent. So I think as an industry, we have to start to think about how do we really hit the big problems. And I think chronic diseases are one of them. Mental health, CNS is an area that has been relatively untouched. There's been a lot of discussion about the Alzheimer's, but you look at mental health, addiction. 400,000 people have died from addiction in the last 5 years. It's like remarkable. And what's going on in mental health coming out of COVID is going to be very difficult to manage. So I think that as an industry, we're going to have to pivot a little bit toward that. And I do see the industry continuing over the next year or so, working on, immuno-oncology and cancer and rare diseases, where we've really started to perfect and make real dents in those diseases. But I think we're going to start to move into other things, and one of them is neuro. With the amount of problems that we have in neuro, and the lack of anything that we've really worked yet, and chronic diseases. And I think in both of those, we're probably going to start to see the rise of digital health play a role together with us.
Yeah.
So we might become an industry that, instead of just developing a pill and giving it to a patient and moving on, we might become an industry where we really start to treat the whole patient, all the way from prevention to making sure that they, an entire spectrum. And I think that we're going to see, some partnerships. We're starting to see some partnerships. We're going to see more in terms of the health tech side, where we kind of pivot away from just simply this bench to bed, give the person a pill, and that's it. And that's particularly true in mental health. Mental health, there's a lot of apps now that are going on, digital therapeutics that are being, accompanying drug therapy. And I think we're going to see more and more of that, the cognitive behavioral therapy things that are going on. And a lot of these are actually going to get FDA approved, like Pear Therapeutics, has a digital therapeutic that actually is getting FDA approved. So some of these are going to get FDA approved, but so we're going to see a shift, I think, in what we do to kind of more urgent needs of society.
I think that's one of the I think that's one of the more important shifts, to basically bring digital health, I will say, into more of a, kind of comfortable place for biopharma. You take companies like Click Therapeutics, Pear Therapeutics, Akili, who, immediately said, we're going to put this in front of the FDA like it's a pill, or like it's an infusion, same endpoints, same clinical trials, et cetera. And I think that was really important. I think for a long time, the tech industry, eschewed the whole regulatory aspect of biopharma and health. But I think those lines are blurring enough that, there's going to be more things that say, we can go in front of the FDA and have this regulated the same way anything else was. And, all of the larger biopharma companies have their own either digital teams, or they have specialists. So it's interesting. I don't know how they're going to integrate it. I don't know what the landmark thing is that's going to kind of bring that truly mainstream, but the architecture is there. Right, the infrastructure for kind of bringing that into the industry at some point, I think, is there. So I think you're right. I think in the future, everyone will be blended in one form or another.
Yeah, to your point, Eric, about 80% of pharma have a chief digital officer now.
Yeah.
And what they're going to do is still an open question. But one of the things that I think they're going to do with it is not only developed solutions outside the industry, the pharma industry, in mental health or addiction or something like that, but they're also going to try to help with the pharma's own infrastructure. For example,
Yeah.
we still have an industry where most drugs fail. 9 out of 10
Right.
fail. And, there's been estimates that over the last 5 years, that's cost us $400 billion. That because of these failures, can digital health somehow use predictive analytics to help us reduce the cost of failure, which is really such a huge part of the cost. We talked a little bit about this, but can digital health really help us start to make a dent in chronic diseases, where we start to treat the whole person and not just the acute phase of the disease? And we started to make a dent positively in these value-based deals. We haven't done enough of them yet, but we're certainly we really wasting a lot of money giving drugs to people where the drug doesn't work. Maybe in half the people, 40% of the people, the drugs don't work. And that's what gave rise to these value-based contracts where the payers only pay if the drug works. Yeah. And we started to see
kind of like the Novartis.
Yeah.
The Novartis Kymriah deal like that. Yeah.
Yep. Oh, yeah. They and so, but the problem, one of the things to make that standard, which I think is where we're going, is that you need somebody to adjudicate in the middle, did the drug work or didn't it? So in other words, if I'm taking the Novartis drug and I failed, did I fail because I was supposed to take it after eating and I didn't eat? Is that why I failed? Or, I went outside and exercised beforehand, I didn't do it or something, why did it fail? So how do you adjudicate successes and failures? And I think digital tech play a big role there. So the opportunities are kind of endless in that field too. And it's interesting. They have a lot of the same, the digital health field has a lot of the same issues that the biotech does, but in a very contracted point of time, in the sense that biotech has a 40-year history and has seen all the ups and downs. And we've seen periods when companies had less than 1 year of cash and things like that. And digital health has really just kind of matured in a very short period of time.
Yeah.
And like when biotech had the family offices and high net worth individuals step in, digital health had people like Tiger Management and General Catalyst and other people, that SoftBank, step in. So there's a lot of capital floating around digital health. Also, a lot of IPOs, a lot of new companies, a lot of companies being priced to perfection. But their time, the digital health time to maturity, was only like 3 or 4 years, versus the biotech's time to maturity was 30 or 40 years. And now we're sitting at the beginning of 22 with a ton of options in front of us of where we go.
Well, and one piece that you mentioned earlier in this segment is about pharma, right? And looking at how they implement digital and whether it's, and one thing that we talked about last week with Michael Aberman was, commercial organizations. And I think if you're talking about putting into the field, whether it's a support digital, right? Or if the therapeutic is digital, like as it's part of the patient's process, like you have to be able to convince providers that is, going to be additive to the patient experience or the patient outcome. And so those commercial organizations can play a role, I think, there. Whereas, you're not going to have the traditional reach into the physicians or providers' offices without that sort of structure.
And we're starting to see that. Northwell in particular is starting to really do some partnerships around some specific areas with these companies. And I think, on the commercialization side, I don't want to say simple, but the sales reps just went according to scripts. Who was writing the most scripts, get them to write more scripts, blah blah blah. And I think it's going to change to, where is the need? Instead of the scripts, what institutions have the need here? Where is the need not being filled and things like that. So I think the nature of the sales rep of just hanging out and, with the doctor gives them runs the most scripts. It's not going to be the way it goes. It's going to be partnering up with institutions where the need for their drug is the greatest. So I think the role of the commercialization is going to change a little bit. But you can really see it. Like, I don't know, like take diabetes, right? Right now, what we do is we take drugs for diabetes. But, if we exercise more, if we ate a little better, things like that, that also plays into the treating the whole person. So you can see kind of something evolving that's more treating the wholeness of the person rather than just give them metformin or something and go home. So I think that's where they're headed. And I agree with you, Jennifer. That's we need those providers to uptake. And that takes us to, how do you propose value for these things? Just like in bio, the health tech is trying to figure out how to propose value or articulate value to the providers. Biotech's trying to articulate value to the payers, and so that's going to be a challenge going forward for both segments of the industry.
Yeah, and you need to be able to, in our construct of the way we deliver healthcare in this country, you have to be able to reimburse it, whether it's the time or the thing. It needs to be reimbursable, right, under our system.
Yep. Yeah, it's one of the big challenges. You think about either mental health or even chronic diseases, but getting to the point where you're actually able to ascribe progress or what exactly are you measuring to say that the patient is getting better? In some cases, if you think about where we sit with cancer and rare diseases, the outcomes of the clinical trials are very clear. We've gotten used to the waterfall plot with a cancer trial, and I think a lot of the things that we will probably need to do is think about how we measure things, think about what we're measuring in these new diseases, and how to basically ascribe some sort of value to that. Because even if we think about something like longevity, right, you can't just wait for 50 years and see who lives the longest. We're not really set up for that. So so here we go. Arthur asked another good question. He says, is a quality adjusted life year still the right metric? So and someone else just joined in the chat and said not necessarily, and they've been trying to evolve that for 15 years without much success. So I think we sit in a little bit of a gray area with how to measure everything.
Yeah, I don't think it is either, because I think there's another revolution coming, which is this longevity revolution. Generally, primates live about 6 times when they reach maturity. They live about 6 times that. Generally, we get to maturity about age 20. So arguably, we should be living to 110, 115, 120, but we die at 80. And so there's a whole bunch of work being done about how do you extend that with a healthy life.
Yeah.
So if there's a chance to extend life healthy without 4 chronic diseases, without being in a wheelchair, without being in a nursing home, nobody wants to, if you say you want to live to 100, nobody raises their hand. If you say you want to live to 100, but you have the same physical activity you had at 50 and same mental acuity at 50, people say, yeah, not bad. Well, there's a lot of people do it. There's a lot of work being done on that, on telomeres and senescent cells and stuff like that. And it's not that far away. So I think that, and there's going to be the buzzwords now are, you don't talk about lifespan, you talk about your health span. Mm-hmm. And if you can kind of if you can kind of be healthy for a longer period of time and then just be ill toward the end for a little, that beats where we are now, where you just go downhill from, age whatever until you're dying. It costs society so much money. So I think that's a revolution that's coming. So I agree that we've been tinkering with this for 15 years, and I don't think anybody really likes quality of adjusted life years.
No.
So we need.
Well, and it disadvantages. Yeah, we can go into the whole host of reasons, including the fact that it significantly disadvantages people that are already disabled. And I mean, there's a whole host of reasons why, at least I And New York Bio has taken the position that the ICERs of the world using that as a metric is not equitable, and shouldn't necessarily be used.
Yeah, that's right. And I agree with that. Although just going back to what we were talking about a second before about value,
Yeah.
Mhm.
I don't know. Let me think. Let's take two examples of value. The manufacturer, or let's call it who it is, Biogen, thought the value of their drug was $56,000.
Yeah.
ICER thought it was five.
I know.
The PCSK9s, they came out last year, a couple years ago. The manufacturers, Regeneron and Amgen, thought that the value was $14,000. ICER thought they were $4,000.
Mhm.
So, a lot of things we don't like about ICER and things like that, but it also shows that we're not we're not on the same page about what value is.
Yeah.
Everything's
Right.
focused on price, and I think that probably over the last 10 years we should have really paid more attention to this, that we and foresaw that it was coming, because we're kind of getting hit with it now. It looks like in this legislative session it'll be okay, but we certainly, the focus has just been on price, and it's not on value. And when you think about it, once these drugs go generic, they're generic forever. So it costs something to make them and sell them, and then they go generic, and that's it. So the issue of can you figure out how to get co-pays down as far as they go? Can you figure out how to get generics on the market as fast as they go? I mean, if you fault pharma, or you could say, I fault you for playing a lot of games to extend patent life, and put delay to pay and all that kind of play and all that kind of stuff. So, but this is something we should have been thinking about a while back, and I'm thinking today about things that we should think about years from now, maybe we're not thinking about today. And I was trying to, an analogy I was trying to draw was, in 2007, this is in 1 year. In 1 year, Apple introduced the iPhone. Facebook opened up not just to college students. Google bought YouTube and launched Android. We're still in 2007. IBM built a cognitive computer named Watson. Twitter, spun out of its parent company, all in the space of 12 months. And then the recession hit in 2008, and kind of big tech just went on and on and on. And now we're, fighting about we're having a discussion about how did big tech get here? Are they too big? Impinge on our privacy, or what? And part of it is that we just didn't pay attention for 10 years, and 10 years later we look up, and this is what we found ourselves with, whether you like it or not, don't like it, or whatever position you want to take on it. And I think that one of the things we have to think about are the science is moving so fast here that we have to make sure, and particularly in terms of the public and public opinion and trust, that we really build it over the next 10 years. So I think of a thing like gene editing. Somatic versus germline editing, and what's it mean, and what's the impact of the doctor in China that did it and had the twins. And it's going to get more complex, this editing. We have in vivo gene editing and things like that, and there's going to be a lot of pushback about are we playing God if we cross the line, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that we today ought to be really focused on some of these issues, because they're going to become front and center as this technology matures and develops. So
Yeah, it's hard to do
I'm
something now.
relating back,
It's
I'm relating
it's really difficult to do
prices.
something now and be right in 10 years.
Yeah, but there's an educational process. So I guess maybe I bring this up, I guess, in the context of pricing, in the sense of, we certainly did not condition people in terms of value. We conditioned people in terms of price,
Yeah.
and that's what
Well,
the
Yeah.
focus is on.
and don't you think that, you know, therapeutics, drugs, particularly small molecule drugs, that's, you go to the hospital, they do lots of things to you, and then, you know, maybe months later you get your bill, right? And then that's, you can talk about surprise medical billing. But if you're on a therapeutic every month, you go and you actually put your money on the counter at your pharmacy. And so it's been different for individuals in how they receive that care. It is much more easily blamed by saying this is the money that came out of my pocket, right? And it's tied to that actual interaction.
Yeah, understood. Agreed.
Which is why I think
And
we
that-
have to do more on out-of-pocket costs.
That's what I was going to say. Which is why kind of just some headline stuff is that, we don't want to slow down innovation for sure.
Yes.
We want to get copays as low as we can for out of pocket, and we want to get to generic drugs as quickly as possible, and not play games to keep and kind of be able to tell the story that after the patent expires, you have generic biotech therapeutic forever.
Right, your pay for delay is my patent settlement, and we might differ on that one. But I don't. So we only have
or even little tweaks to the molecule or something like that, just to extend the patent, extend. I mean,
intellectual property is very complicated.
Yeah,
we don't want to miss our opportunity having you with us to talk about the New York ecosystem, right? And clearly we are very pro New York here at New York Bio, shockingly. And we actually had a question from Maria Gotch asking you what you think is still needed in New York to turn New York into sort of a world-class life sciences ecosystem.
Yeah. Hi, Maria. If you look at some of the other areas, I think we've made such progress, and everywhere I turn, it's something in life sciences. The tough thing about New York is that when you go to other areas like Boston or San Diego or even San Francisco, you walk down the street, you see 10 of your friends that are in life sciences also. New York, you don't really do that, and we can't really change that. Having said that, so much is happening that hasn't happened in the past. But one of the things that the other hubs have had is that they've had companies that have matured and become big successes, have gotten acquired, and then a lot of the management teams from the acquired companies went out and started new companies. So it's not quite the powerhouse it used to be, but San Diego had a company called Hybridon. They've sold to Eli Lilly, and all the management team from Hybridon went out and started new companies.
Yeah.
And if you looked at San Diego and you looked at the management teams, they were all from Hybridon, and San Diego became a real hub for a while. You look at today up in Boston, in addition to the academic institutions, you have the management teams coming out of Genzyme that are starting to, all start their own companies. So if I could wave a wand to kind of just accelerate us, I think it would be nice to have a big company, a big win that gets acquired that ends up then spinning out, talent and things like that. I mean, I do think that one of the things, that's a big problem, big issue for the industry, and I think it is going to be for New York too, is talent. Really hard to. I hear that over and over from recruiters, from boards. It's then with the number of companies, going back to the very beginning of our conversation, the number of companies we have out there, to be able to fill them with people it's tough. So if you could fill them with people who've been there, done that, already sold one or two companies, that is a real plus. And I'd love to see us have more of those types of people hanging around the ecosystem, because the startup ecosystem is pretty darn good right now, I think. And now we got to get it past the startup ecosystem a little bit, and move the ball down the field a bit.
Yeah, well, I feel really good about the potential for that happening. Just,
and by the way,
quality
not to make a I should just say, not to butter you up guys up, but New York Bio played a pretty big role in that. I mean, I've been in and around with New York Bio for a long time, and New York Bio has really come and now started to become a real force to help do that. So congratulations, guys. But anyway, Derek,
checks in the mail, Dennis.
I interrupted you, Derek. I'm sorry.
No, I just said your checks in the mail. Please, by all means, keep talking. I look at the kind of teams that we have here and the kind of people that we're bringing here, and even if you're just either around the Alexandria Center or in J Labs for a day or anything like that, you really look and you see the high quality of folks we have here. And they were here before, but now they're at a lot of the same places, and it's easier to notice them. I mean, I think back to the annual meeting, we had Nolan Townsend from Lexio, and Rachel McMinn from Neurogene, and Zandy Forbes from Mira Gene Therapies, all in the same area, all dynamite CEOs, all building really good teams, all with terrific backgrounds. And we've got that substrate, and there's been a ton of people that have put in a lot of effort over the last 10 years that have kind of made the last 3 years so exciting. And and again, Maria asked this question, but a ton of credit to Maria, who basically was one of the people that helped make all of this even possible anyway.
Yeah, for sure over the last 10 years. Yeah,
totally,
absolutely.
I don't think we've gotten to that.
I'm sorry. I think that, just to follow quickly on what Derek said, I think our challenge now with that is to keep those companies here.
Yeah.
And make sure that they feel that they can build a real business here, and instead of just leaving town and going somewhere else. And I think that's what we have to do next. Figure out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and and we have heard, as we've talked to people, that certainly one of our major strengths, I mean, we have a lot in New York, but one of the major strengths for our industry is the fact of our academic medical centers, right? And the fact that we do have so many people that come out of academia that want to work in industry now, but want to also stay here. And I also think I think we have potential to have companies come in from elsewhere, particularly European companies that want to look at New York because they have consular offices, right? And try to put down their US operations and look here. So I think that could be an important growth area for us.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that. And I don't know if it's a coincidence or not, but over the holidays, I had 3 different phone calls from people, or emails from people from European companies that say, "Can I talk to you because I want to move our operations to the US, and I want to talk to you about how to do that." And it just struck me as that was odd, all coming at once. So maybe that, yeah.
We welcome all comers. We welcome Europeans.
Absolutely.
We welcome growing companies in New York. We welcome new startups and exits with executive teams that do it again.
That's right.
So we are out of time. Dennis, thank you so much. This was a very, very amazing conversation, and a perfect substitute at a normal hour for being in San Francisco instead of at the JP Morgan conference today. We wish everyone a great day. Thanks again to PHCBI for sponsoring this month, and we'll see you next week. Take care, everybody.
All right. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great day.
Everybody. Take care.
Thank you for tuning in to New York Bio's virtual breakfast series. Join us every Tuesday at 9 a.m. for more discussions with leaders from across the healthcare spectrum. For more information on New York Bio, please visit us at www.newyorkbio.org.